Now we're going to take a look at some key introductory concepts in economics. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is opportunity cost. In economics, the cost of something is what you give up to get it. So for instance, if I go to the movies, there's a monetary cost, say $10 for a ticket. There's also a time cost. There's 2 hours to sit in the movie that I can't be doing something else, say working or studying or going to a concert or something like that. So when I choose to go to the movies, the full economic cost of it is not just the $10, but also the 2 hours in time. This is something that we're going to develop in great detail as we go through the semester, but it's important to understand early on that opportunity cost is important as we think about economic problems. Microeconomics versus macroeconomics. Microeconomics is concerned with how people make decisions and how people make choices, or how firms make choices. We concern ourselves with the decisions of households. How much of a good do they want to consume? Or the decisions of firms. How much of a good do they want to produce? Macroeconomics is concerned with economic aggregates. We're concerned with how the choices of individuals add up to influence the whole economy, and it's not always in predictable ways. But macroeconomics is concerned with things like interest rates and unemployment and inflation. Now we're going to take a look at the distinction between positive and normative economics. Positive economics is concerned with explaining how the world works. So we formulate and test hypotheses. For instance, we might expect that a higher minimum wage will reduce employment as employers choose to hire fewer workers at the higher wage rate. This is a positive statement, and whether it's true or not, we can go to the data and test it. We can take a look and see whether or not this is true, whether or not this positive statement, this hypothesis, is supported by the data. Normative economics is concerned with how the world should work, and I've listed an example of a normative statement, that we should lower the minimum wage. We might argue that lowering the minimum wage will lead to more hiring by these kinds of firms, and suggest that we should lower the minimum wage. Alternatively, we might make the converse of that statement. We should raise the minimum wage, and if we think that it's more important to put more money in the hands of minimum wage workers, then that's a normative statement that involves a value judgment, involves us taking an opinion about what we think is the best policy. And you can see here sort of arguments on both sides. You can make positive statements that seem to suggest that that support a normative conclusion of raising the minimum wage. You can also think of positive statements that might support a normative conclusion of lowering the minimum wage. But when we move from making predictions about how the economy works to making suggestions about what we should do, we're going from positive to normative economics. Most of the time we're going to try to do positive economics here, but it's important as we go through the semester to recognize which phase we're in. Marginal thinking. An important concept in economics, and especially in microeconomics, is this notion of marginal thinking. Marginal thinking means thinking about how you allocate your next dollar or the next hour of your time, rather than thinking collectively about how you did. An example is thinking about how you allocate the time you study across your classes. Suppose you took 2 classes and you looked up after a month of the semester and you see that in math I have an A and in English I have a C. And you might think, well, that means that I need to study more in English. But it's unlikely that you're going to quit studying math completely and start studying English. So for instance, if you spent 4 hours a week studying math and 4 hours a week studying English for the first month, and you see you have an A in math and a C in English, you might go from 4 and 4 to say 5 hours of English and 3 hours of math to try to bring up the English grade. This is what I mean by marginal thinking. It's unlikely that you're going to look up and see that, well, I've got a C in English, so I should quit studying math completely and start studying English entirely and spend all of my 8 hours of studying on English. It's been said that economics is simply the recognition that people respond to incentives and that everything else is just details. And I think that there's some truth to that. One of the most important things that we're going to sort of recognize as we go through the semester is the role that incentives play in shaping people's behaviors. And one of the biggest forms of incentives and incentive signals that we're going to see is it works through prices. For instance, one of the most important prices that people face is the price that their employers are willing to pay for their labor. And we go into careers, for instance, that not only pay well, but careers that pay well is an important part of making decisions about what we want to do for our career. And so when we see high salaries in, say, nursing, a lot of people decide to become nurses. And when we see low salaries, for instance, these days in journalism, we see a lot fewer people going into journalism than say, 30, 40 years ago when newspapers hired so many more people than they do now. So people respond to incentives. As the prices of nurses, as the wages we pay nurses have gone up, we see more people go into nursing. As we see the wages for journalists go down, we see fewer people going into journalism and becoming newspaper reporters. So people respond to incentives, and prices are a big one. Lastly, we're going to talk about markets, and we're going to spend an awful lot of time this semester thinking about what a market is and how markets work. And at its most basic level, markets are simply places where buyers and sellers come together to exchange goods and services. As we walk through thinking about markets this semester, two important things we're going to consider are prices. What do sellers charge, and what do buyers pay for particular goods and services? What are they willing to pay? And then the second one is to think about quantities. How many buyers will show up in a particular market, and how many sellers will show up, or how many of that particular good will firms produce? How many resources will they devote to the production of that good? And one of the things that we're going to learn as we go through is that markets can often be a useful way to create the incentives to balance the needs of suppliers and demanders, of buyers and sellers in a market.